This is the wrap-up by Progress Canada. Today we're joined by the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party, Bonnie Crombie. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Teresa.
Okay, so we've got, I'm saying we because of course I'm a party member as well. We've got an AGM coming up in September where there will be a leadership review happening, which is something that happens after every election, normal party process. So that sort of begs the question of, how people will vote on that and what they think of the last campaign, what they think, going forward to the next campaign. So I want to talk about the next campaign first, and then we'll get into some of these other issues. But some of your supporters suggest that the last campaign was pretty much unwinnable. We had a lot of, external forces happening in the campaign. You had Trump and his tariff crisis, and that really pulled away focus from Ford's governing record, which, as we know, is terrible. So a lot of folks, in the party, I've talked to them myself, think no one could have won this campaign. This isn't a Bonnie issue. This is the world we were in issue. At the same time, they also argue that there was a lot of wins that we can celebrate from that campaign. I'm not going to list them off, actually. Maybe you should list them off because there is a number of them, and I want to give you that chance to talk about them. So what are some of the wins from the campaign, and what can we learn from that?
Yeah, excellent. So I want you to keep in mind that I had been leader exactly 13 months when the snap election was called. I had been spending my time traveling across the province and meeting small groups and stakeholders everywhere, rural communities and northern communities. And we were getting rumblings of an early election, not knowing if it would be January, February, April, or if they would wait it out to the fixed date, of course, which was June 2026. Ultimately, I think I'll say that it was stacked against us. I think they picked a perfect storm of issues that really was problematic for us. We weren't completely ready because at the time we were out raising money. We were raising money very successfully, but we were still that band of 9 independents and a whole lot of volunteers that were making a difference. We didn't have the staff complement. We didn't have the resources. And we weren't able to shape the ballot question as much as we wanted to. I will also say that there was a leadership vacuum federally. And Doug Ford, of course, stepped in and wrapped himself in the flag and called himself Captain Canada. And I know we're going to talk about that later and how we could have pivoted. So the ballot question wasn't ours to shape. There wasn't leadership at the top with the federal government. Doug Ford stepped in, and suddenly there was a perceived threat about trade war and tariffs with our southern neighbors. And in those circumstances, during a polar vortex, let's not forget the coldest, shortest month of the year, it's not as likely people are going to vote for change when their jobs are under threat and they're promising to protect jobs in Ontarians. So it was a pretty tough gamble. I will also say that there are a lot of parts we could have handled better, but there was good news. There was good news. I mean, I see the campaign as a turning point for Liberals. We grew to 14 MPPs. We have brought on 5 new members, 5 new incredible members, by the way, and we came so close in so many other places. As you well know, when Erin Mills was lost by 25 votes and Burlington by 39. So many, under 140 and 150 elsewhere, so close in so many places. We became an official party again, which gave us access to a lot of resources. And we did achieve 30% of the vote. 30. And that's no small laughing matter. When I became leader, we had 23% of the vote, and we peaked at about 33 at one point, and at the end of the day, we were at 30. And you think that would have at least bought us official opposition. But because of what they call voter inefficiency, we weren't the opposition. Here, lo and behold, the NDP with 18% of the vote became the opposition and garnered more seats. That really stung. But what hurt more was my seat. I know we're going to get to that later. We'll talk about the wins. The wins are we came a very strong second in 77 ridings. We grew our vote support in 102 of the 124 ridings. When we were raising money hand over fist, it's a secret sauce I have. The first year we raised $6 million. We were able to leverage that to run a fully funded campaign. And I don't think that was the expectation, especially in a snap election call. This year to date, we've raised $5 million. It's allowed us to bring on a Liberal Caucus Services Bureau. I think we'll talk about that as a huge win, and I'm going to introduce some of those people a little bit later. But as a result of not being successful, we went into action. We wanted to understand why, what we could have done better. And we launched a full review. Catherine McGarry, our incredible president, launched that review. We've had 9 regional meetings, as you well know. I've attended every one of them, and I was there to present my case and listen. I did the Q&As, but then I left so that they could feel open about being openly critical of me and the team that I didn't think they would be if I were there. So I look forward to the presentation of that report coming up soon. But I will say that change doesn't happen overnight. I mean, I know Mark Carney got a lot of success, and that's terrific, but they were government. They held the majority of seats, and they had huge resources as well at the time. Were kinds of resources we just didn't have. So it was a turning point. I saw it as a breakthrough in many areas. And while there was specific gains, listen, for me, it wasn't enough either. I wanted to win as well. And I will share with you that they saw the fact that we had momentum too. We didn't go to an election because we were weak. We went to an election because they saw strength. They saw us building popular support. And raising money hand over fist. And I know that the advice Doug Ford received from Corey Tenike and Nick Kouvalis was, look what's happening. You're going to have a bigger problem in June 2026. She said 30% of the vote and bringing in $6 million and growing. You better address this now. And I know he was reluctant, but he took their advice, and the perfect storm prevailed, and they got their win.
So I want to talk about a few things there. So you mentioned the second place finishes, and I think they are really important, and something we're not talking about enough, in my opinion, because I always say this. I was just talking to the PEI Green Party leader as well last week about, when we talk about elections, it's a little bit like sports. Like you see the final tally and you think, oh, that's a blowout, but that's not really reflective of what it looked like on the ground. You mentioned the 25 vote difference in the one seat. If you do the math, 30% should be 37 seats, not 14, right? If we had, proportional representation and all that kind of stuff. So,
or even a ranked ballot, Teresa. Even a ranked ballot would have made a huge difference. Because we were 77 ridings, we placed second. So the third and fourth place parties off the ballot would have come to us.
Exactly. So I think, Doug Ford got 80 seats, but if my math is correct, and it isn't always, but if my math is correct, he should have gotten 51 if we're basing it on popular support. And then, of course, that would not be a majority. He'd be in a minority situation. So just to give people a little bit of context of what the vote really looks like when you think about it. Having said that, though, when you ran for leader, your team and yourself positioned this as, you were the candidate to win and won. I had my doubts at the time because, having been a political staffer and at Central many campaigns, I know how hard it can be to build back from opposition, especially in third place. You also had, I would say a corrupt premier in office who has a really terrible record, and a pretty struggling NDP who has sat in opposition. This is now their third time at it. They have not been able to make any real gains against Ford during this time. So your detractors really argue that despite everything that happened in January, February, there was a year's worth of runway where you could have been doing stuff to actually start chipping away at Ford's popularity and really bringing his record to the fore. So can you talk about some of the mistakes that were had? Because again, 77 seats second place is a victory in some sense because you're making progress, but it's also a failure on the ground perhaps because you haven't, gotten it over the line.
Yeah, my detractors don't have the kind of fundraising prowess that I bring to the table either, and wouldn't have run a fully funded campaign if they were in the situation that I was of an early election call. All our plans were to roll out our nominations and build out our platform for June 2026. I was out on tour, etc. So, as I mentioned, we went to an early election because we had momentum, that I had grown at least 7 to 10% over the 1 year that I had become leader, and that we were raising money. Our fundraising was exceeding everyone's expectations. We raised $2.5 million in the December meeting alone. We raised this after an election, after defeat, after 2 leadership races and 2 elections, federal and provincial. We raised $500,000 in March. That's pretty good considering, and we'll continue to do that. But listen, I'm the first one that feels humbled at the result. It's not what I wanted either. I'm not going to pretend anything different. I wanted to win. I wanted to take down Doug Ford. I know, like you know, how corrupt he is. I don't understand how other people don't see it. I think one of the reasons I was chosen was because I do get under his skin. He never had much time for me as mayor, and didn't like that I was so forward and so frank and so bold with him. So as I said, we were preparing for June 2026 because, of course, we had a fixed state election, and that's where we've set our plans, our nomination plans and our platform plans. And I think that's in that scenario, I see that there would have been much better odds of winning than what had happened. You know, we were also facing forces federally. We had a prime minister that lacked popularity and stepped aside, and we were feeling that. And then Mark Carney came, but they were in a leadership race, and many of our workers went federal because it was exciting to be part of that leadership race, and left us during an election call. So there is a little bit of that as well. So we weren't ready to the degree we needed to be. That's true. But that is largely because we were planning out for June 2026. But not only that, we weren't even a party then. We weren't an official party. We had 9 independent members, a skeleton staff. We had their legislative assistants, some party members, and a lot of volunteers helping. You know, there wasn't that opportunity to put on a full-scale campaign. I do want to mention one more thing that we don't talk about a lot, is in that the Conservatives spent $8 million on attack ads on me. $8 million. You know, we raised 6, and we thought, do we start spending it? And we made a very strategic decision. We would save it and leverage it for, which looked like an early election call. We better be safe, and we better spend it when we really need it, which is going into the election. And not only the attack ads, but those Feel Good Ontario ads. In a normal year, governments spend about $24 million on Feel Good ads. They spent 124. So they were seeding the ground with their own messaging to prep. And you know, then we saw the premier on Fox News and CNN. I bet people don't realize we actually paid for those spots, $1 million every time he appeared. So here we have Captain Canada wrapped in a flag. So yeah, we weren't ready. We struggled with the ground game for sure. We didn't have the outreach people that we have today. We had PLAs, many of them largely defunct. Now, the reality is, whenever the next election comes, whether it's in 2.5 or 3 years, as I think it will be, because I don't think Doug Ford's going to stay to the very end, we will have those resources in place. And our focus is on rebuilding our PLAs, revitalizing them, renewal of our party. And it's giving us the time and the runway to do that. I mean, with the 1.5 years, the 2 years that I had to get prepared as leader could have gained us a win. I'm confident another 1.5 years we would have won. I'm confident of that. But now we have more time, and now we need to focus on rebuilding the party. And we need to leverage our federal counterparts, and we need to put the resources in place to give them the kinds of supports that they need. I will share with you some of the great things that we have done. We've assigned all of our MPPs, all 14 of them, 4 or 5 ridings to mentor, to be that person that will come to speak to their AGM or come and get to know their communities and work with them to build up. I mean, it's fine that I drop in and check in with them, but they will have an actual mentor figure in our sitting members who are quite passionate about this new responsibility. The other failure of the campaign, I think, and I've heard it often because I attended all those 9 regional reviews, is not pivoting in our messaging. Our messaging was strong. We went out where we polled and focus groups on healthcare. We knew we were strong on healthcare. We were going to healthcare, affordability, affordable housing, etc., and education.
One of the pieces of feedback I've been getting from people is that you've started to acknowledge some of these failings a little too late, that there was a sense that nothing went wrong with the campaign, and you and your team thought you did everything right, and it was just circumstances that derailed things. I think you brought up something important which sort of negates that argument, which is you went to all of these regional meetings, but you stepped out so people could have freewheeling discussions, which I think is really important anytime feedback is given. Like, it's not real feedback if the leader is standing in the corner looming over people, right? So I think that is a really important element of it. Another important element of that is when you are the leader and things have gone wrong on the campaign that you have functionally overseen, you want to give people that runway to give that feedback before
Right.
you actually start weighing in on what you think about it and how you will action it.
Thank you
So
for that.
that the AGM is where this feedback will be unveiled. And that's why, in my opinion, as a hopefully rational person, you have largely held your powder on these discussions because you want to give people the chance to weigh in. Can you talk a little bit about that?
You know what? Absolutely. First, let me say again how humbling the experience was. I'm used to winning. I used to win with almost 80% of the vote. So this was a very humbling for me. And I don't take that lightly. I believe strongly in something I call tone at the top, that the leader sets the tone and sets the pace. And perhaps I should have insisted that we pivot sooner. I will say I will also feel really strongly about accountability. And I am accountable to the membership and the team that put me in place, to the people who vote for me as leader. I feel extremely accountable to them. So structuring these meetings, having the executive council meeting, we had the council of executive, the provincial council meeting, and then the 9 regional meeting, and made a real effort, not only to attend every one of them and listen, because in my portion, I presented the case, so the good, the bad, the ugly, what we could have done better, what we are working on going forward, the changes we hope to see and to bring forward. It was received very well. And then, of course, I did Q&A. And then I took that time to also meet with the candidates in the area, the riding presidents, some of the local hotspots. I mean, it wasn't just a 1-hour effort. Spent some time in each of those communities and met with Liberals, but also with real people. So the feedback is very constructive. A report is being written, and there was a lot of misinformation. Floating around about who precisely um, was running the campaign. No one seemed to be sure who was in charge. None of that was certain. I think that too many candidates also felt like they were alone and didn't have the resources that they needed. They felt that the cavalry was coming. I've had that sense as a candidate myself in the past. Perfect.
Right. And I actually want to talk about that because there's a saying, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to, right. And having seen a bunch of campaigns, I don't compare the campaign you and your team have just run to, the mythical version I wish we had as a party, even in, government times. I compare it to the campaigns that I've seen in the past. And, I think there's a lot of things that we hear every time about campaigns about, candidates not feeling supported. I always tell candidates myself, like, do your thing. You know your community the best. Central will weigh in as needed, but, go lead your campaign, which is tricky for new candidates, which is something that happens a lot when, of course, our caucus is only 9 or 14. Most people will be new. So it is really tricky to support everyone in that way. But like, I think there are elements that can be improved upon. I think one of the frustrations for people is with the review, and we're about to get into the review that the team of volunteers is doing, and they are very smart, wonderfully hardworking people. I highly respect all the people doing the review right now. So, people who have questions about that, I think there's a really good team in place, so don't worry about that. But given that we have done this after 2018 and we've done this after 2022, have you read those reports? Have you seen what the commonalities are between them? And is there
I've
anything
been,
that you recognize from your own campaign?
yeah, certainly. I've gotten the briefings. I haven't read the final report yet. I don't think it's out. Let me just say that there was an expectation that the Central would do more for the individual candidates. Many of them were nominated later, and let me get to the nominations in 1 second. And there's a sense that we need to have more training for our campaign managers on an ongoing basis. So we're not scrambling right during in the midst of an election of who's going to run these campaigns. So we needed more support from the center. But going forward, let me also say that we are building from the ground up, and we have heard the commonalities and the constructive comments that people have made, and many of them aren't criticisms, they're constructive. They want to be helpful, they want to help us rebuild, and they want to help us move forward. And the fact that we now have the we're official party, we have the resources to build Liberal Caucus Services Bureau. This is the first time in 8 years since we've been government that we've had such a group. So we have a professional outreach team under Miles Hopper. They have a desk. We have regional desks that are supporting all of the regions. And I think Miles, you can hire a few more. He needs a few more people under him. I have a brand new chief of staff that serves all the caucus. Her name is Sandra Jansen. We have Liz Mendez, who's her deputy chief of staff. And everybody knows and loves Liz. She has been a candidate before. She worked for Charles Sousa in finance before. She is fantastic. And I have a new communications director, Madeline Calzavera. And she is, I guess I did get her name right, Calzavera. She is terrific. So a lot of women run team as well. A lot of women in place to run. But we listened,
Right.
and we are revitalizing. But the specifics, we heard you want nominations sooner, right? You need nominations, especially in small towns, rural communities. You need those nominations earlier. And so we've made a point, we heard, and nominations will open up in January for those people who ran before and did really well and have active PLAs. They will get the earliest nominations, and then people can apply to get their nomination. But we agree. Bruce Vanjoy is a perfect example. He spent 2 years going door to door knocking, getting that name recognition.
It's something that, I had Kathleen Wynne on last month, and she was talking about the 2003 election when there was that upswing that brought in Dalton McGuinty and our modern standard bearer of liberalism that came in from out of nowhere in opposition.
Yeah.
She had 2 years to campaign as the candidate, and she said that was instrumental.
Made the difference, right?
I want to go back just a second to talk about the org chart you sort of just laid out, because I think it is so crucial to actually have people know who is doing what. So often in campaigns, it's sort of nebulous. People are coming and going, and it's confusing to people. I will say one of the complaints I have about the campaign is, a lot of us raised our hands. I have said I don't want to do campaigns full time. I've ruined my body doing them in the past. So, I don't raise my hand too high. But some of us have raised our hands to help out during the campaign. And there's a lot of really dedicated women, specifically in the party I know, who raised their hands during the campaign and didn't really get an answer back. And these are like hardcore people who've been super involved in high profile roles in the past. And part of problem I saw was that there was a bit of bottlenecking happening where people didn't know who was responsible for what. And then when they did, they couldn't get an answer because those people were so overwhelmed. So this is actually a two-pronged thing for me. One is that bottlenecking, but the second part is, and the reason why I think it happened, was waiting so long to actually put money behind the campaign. So when people join a campaign, for our listeners here, usually they are professionally employed elsewhere and then
Right.
get brought onto the campaign, and they get paid for their time, and they have to take a leave of absence from work. So you need a flexible job to do that, of course, in the first place, but also the money
Right.
needs to be there. And part of the pressure was that the per vote subsidy was supposed to close down. Ford extended it at the last minute, I think partially because he wanted to split the opposition vote and wanted to make sure our
Prop up the
parties
NDP. He saw
right,
us raising
exactly.
money and not the NDP. Exactly. Wanted to prop
Exactly.
them
So
up.
he wanted that to go along. And then, but what that meant was the per vote subsidy is usually what guarantees the loan from the bank for the campaign, because it's saying,
Correct.
yes, money will be coming in afterwards. So with that delay, there was the delay in hiring. And, you know, in my opinion, as somebody who has seen the campaigns in the past, I think we spent money too late. And then we're not able to get the team up to scratch in time. And part of that
Yeah.
was we didn't, you know, I think we all knew the campaign was coming and generally when it would be, but when you don't have a fixed election date that you're working towards, you can't do the same kind of planning in terms of what you're spending on. Can you talk about
Yeah.
that? And then the other piece to that is, this is my long-winded section of a question, but the other piece of that is, you have been, you know, in the party for a long time. You were a federal MP as well, but you've also been mayor for a long time, where it was sort of you as the brand, and a party is a different construct. And I think you took this campaign, you know, overseeing this campaign as a bit of a CEO level of, I trust my people, they're going to go do the work, which I actually think is a great leadership trait. However, I think it did mean that some of these things were a bit fumbled because of the issues I just talked about, and that
Mhm.
perhaps you didn't see it as it was happening. So
Yeah.
can you talk about
So,
some of those issues and what that would look like going forward?
so you're quite right. And I have to pull apart uh, the very constructive comment you made about this campaign and if it differs from other campaigns. Um, because once you have a team in place and once a strategy is baked, you do tend to move forward with a lot of momentum. And, you know, I will say that the one criticism I heard, it was very siloed, and that people weren't warmly welcomed who wanted to contribute. That's a flaw that will be changed. Look, we were a new team and a young team. We had a group of strategic advisors around me for a while, and there didn't seem to be that logical campaign manager that would come forward that, you know, was seasoned but new and young and had new and great ideas. And so some of the strategic advisors took over. Jen Tomney, as you well know, who was a very, very capable strategist and comms person, communication strategist, and Chad Walsh, who had worked in previous campaigns. Both brought a lot of talent and some experience, but there really wasn't very few people that had run a provincial-wide campaign. And so, you know, we all learned together. And I do hear some of the criticisms. And I'll say Darcy McFadden was part of that team as well, and she was excellent. Um, um, but the team could have grown, you know, and I take that very seriously, that people felt shut out. People felt specifically not included. And I'll say that wasn't the intent. The intent was, this is going to be the team. This is our strategy. Let's just drive forward. Let's just go. There's so little time, 28 days in the polar vortex when we're fighting Donald Trump, that I think there was just this concern that too many outside voices. But then again, it didn't allow us to shift. So I will
Yeah.
say, tone at the top matters to me. I have heard that changing the culture matters. And that's why I have this incredible team at Queen's Park who is supporting us, a lot of them women, as I mentioned. And I believe that we're become a party that listens to the membership, goes out to our members, to them, not expecting them to come to us. We believe in local leadership at the community level and every day, not just during the election. And we know things need to change. We know our data tools need to change. We know we need clearer communications and more streamlined coordination. That all needs to change as part of the central campaign. And I've heard that we need to nurture our campaign managers as much as we need to identify our candidates who should be local champions sooner and get them on the ground sooner.
Right. So I want to pivot to that because again, one of the discussions that I've been having with fellow members is that the campaign was what it was. However, you know, deciding whether we want a new leader or not, or how we want to move ahead on other things, really isn't about the past campaign. It's about the next campaign and how we're preparing for that and what our approach is to that. So, we've already mentioned that there's an independent group of volunteers who are doing the campaign review right now. They'll come back with a bunch of recommendations, but you've also recently put out, I didn't actually count, is it 10? I don't know how many, but some ideas that you want to put forward to improve the relationship with members, with volunteers, with candidates, and improve our processes ahead of the next campaign. So do you want to talk about some of those? I know there's, you mentioned nominations already, new tools, there's a whole bunch of different things. I'm sure you want to talk about a policy convention, but here's your opportunity to talk about some of those ideas you've put forward in the last week or so.
So yeah, a lot of changes that we're making. I already mentioned the open nominations, starting a lot sooner, evaluating our data tools and how effective they were. There have been so much criticism of the different contractors that we used and the results that we were given. Local input from the campaign. The policy convention. Last year we had a very successful, shall I call it a thinkers conference. We had some great names. We had all the unions represented, great breakout sessions. But I think our people really want to get on the floor of a convention and discuss policy and put the policy platform together. And one of the issues that is rising to the surface, as you well know, is this lowering the voting age from 18 to 16. And my own children have been advocating for that for years and spoke at liberal conventions about lowering the voting age 30 years ago, 20 years ago. So, those are the kind of things we just really want to get back on the floor and do that. So between the tools, changing the culture, opening nominations, getting policy and platform out sooner. I mean, we got our policy platform out late. One of the important ingredients was education, and we got that out quite a bit later. We didn't address northern and rural issues, and I had made that commitment that we would address northern and rural issues. I had been touring cattle farms and dairy farms and egg farms and meeting people in small towns and communities and promising the farmers that we would speak out on succession planning and business management and protecting farmland. And then there was none of that because we went out on healthcare and we decided that the rural towns, small communities were even more acutely affected by doctor shortages, ER closures, longer wait times, longer drives for care, affordable housing being not built, lack of affordable housing, affordability issues. It was more expensive in the north. We thought the common themes of our campaign would speak to northern and rural voters. That wasn't the case. That was another big miss. So those are seniors issues. As I spoke to the Seniors Commission last night, they said, we could have had a more dedicated platform or bullet for our seniors team. So we are rebuilding. Those are some of the priorities. We've put them all out. I think they're all out on Instagram right now. But the focus really is, now that we have the time, we got to do the work on the ground, whether we call it reforming, rebuilding, revitalizing, whatever it is. We need strong PLAs at the local level. We need to get people engaged. On the calls I've been making and the group calls, the Zoom calls we've been doing, a lot of great ideas. So last night came out, we're doing, is there going to be a call to action like they do federally? And one group in Carleton said, hey, we do check-ins. We go knock on seniors' door and just say, how are you doing? What more can we do for you? I thought that's brilliant. We're not actually asking anything of them. We're asking how they are. Another group at Sarnia They did a strategic plan. They did a branding exercise in what it meant to be a Liberal today. And then they went out to stakeholders in the community, like the fire chief and the police chief and the person who ran the United Way and the local hospital, and asked them about what are the issues they care about. How could a political party make a difference for them and their lives and the lives of people in Sarnia? I thought it was brilliant. And these were some of the ideas that we're sharing to get more engagement
Yeah.
at the local grassroots level.
That's something that I think, so the Democrats in the US are having a similar moment in their party right now where they're rethinking how they're doing things. And what you just mentioned is essentially what we call deep canvassing, of course, where instead of doing canvassing as like a head count of who's supporting us, you actually go to the door and have real conversations. And this is the period where you do that kind of conversation. Your first conversation with a voter should not be in the 28 days of the campaign. Of course, it should
That's
be
right.
ahead of that time. And you should be having these deep conversations about what they actually want to see. That should inform the policy process. So that, that's just my pet thing that I want to see as we move towards,
Absolutely.
more grassroots politics. But the other part of this is, there's a demographic cliff happening right now in volunteerism where just given the age people are, the age they're having their kids, they tend to drop out of the volunteer market, if you will. And that's not expected to recover until 2030, which is unfortunately a year after the next campaign, if it happens that late. But the other part of that is a lot of women are dropping out of volunteering. And, these things impact every volunteer driven organization, but including politics, because that's often, that is not always the first place people turn to go volunteer. So this is going to be an issue going forward, regardless of, whether you're a leader in that campaign or not, like whoever it is. A lot of these issues are systemic, they're society-wide, they're not OLP specific. And these are things we're going to have to think about. So I was happy to see some of these ideas coming to the fore. I do want to ask you about the policy conference because, there's a lot of folks in the party that is their main obsession. I'm not one of them, but I'm sure they will want to hear about it.
Yeah.
You come from the federal tradition initially, where it's very much,
chaired the 2012 policy convention with Muriel Belanger federally.
There goes. So it's the paddles up, like, let me vote on an actual itemized thing. Is that what you're envisioning here, or is it more of a conversation?
I am. So there are a couple of ways to do this. One is the Thinkers Conference. That's what we did last year. And I liked it. I loved it. The engagement was so high. There were some of the rooms with some of the topics, like when Jennifer Keesmaat was speaking on housing, affordable housing, you couldn't get in the room. Some of the education sessions as well, you couldn't get in the room. But our people are hungry to debate and discuss and put motions forward. I know that about our folks. And I heard that loud and clear from the many calls I've been making, whether it's the Youth Commission, the Women's Commission, or the Seniors Commission, who I met with most recently. They're a force, and that's what they're asking for. And there's no problem with that. I agree with it too. I've been speaking with Simon. He thinks it's a big undertaking to do annually, or probably biannually we can do a policy convention. So whether it'll be next year or the year after, we'll firm that up, but we want to get one done as soon as possible.
I think one of the big takeaways for me, I did comms at the party, but comms was anything with words in it, which often meant, working with volunteers and things like that. And I think, given the lack of volunteers out there, we need to do even more to treat them well and to make them feel like they have a stake in the decision-making that's happening. Just on the policy piece, I'm glad to hear the sort of, voting
I like
approach that you have in mind, because I think the membership has been hungry for that, because they participate at the federal level as well. Right. And they see that. So I think they are looking for that. And every time we don't have that, they get their backs up a bit. But ultimately, a platform will come together, and then you as leader will sort of have to sign off on it, because you are the one who's putting it forward to people. So, Dalton McGuinty has said between 1999 and 2003, the major change that happened was he took a lot of ownership over the campaign, because in 1999, he hadn't thought that much about the policy or the team or the approach. And in the intervening years, he really went and thought about, like, what do I want to stand behind as an idea? Like, what are the innovative things people are doing across the world, in the rest of Canada, in other places in Ontario? So what do you see that looking like after the parties come together and voted on things? How involved will you be in sort of picking it? I've worked with leaders who were very much signing off on like different budget items, and I don't know that you need to be that involved. What do you think your approach will be? Are there specific ideas you have in your head that you really want to be central to the next campaign?
Yes, thank you for that question, actually. And as I alluded to earlier, I do believe in tone at the top, and it is up to me to set the tone, set the mission. And we have done a couple of branding sessions with our caucus, and we're going to do another one because we want to finalize who we are as a party, what our vision is together. I know what my vision is, and I think they do as well. And it's very much about economic growth and economic development because of the strength that I brought to the city of Mississauga when I was the mayor. And but growth, but compassion, because that's what sets us apart as liberals, because we want that growth so that we can support the kind of programs that we need to help people, especially help our marginalized people, people who are more vulnerable, and provide all those programs and investments in things like education and programs for our artistic youth, etc. That we need, doubling the ODSP. We need strong economic growth to do that. And so that's what I'd like to be known for, much as Dalton McGuinty was the education premier. I want it to be about growth. And I want to bring business back to our party. They've left us and they shouldn't have. We were the party that was promising the small business tax cuts. And we do believe in incentives for business. We need business to grow. And I have a great understanding of how to attract investment into the province. I did so very successfully, over $8 billion worth of investments and tens of thousands of jobs in some pretty key sectors. Here in Mississauga, it's all about aerospace and advanced manufacturing. It's about life sciences. It's about IT and high tech. And of course, it's about the financial industry as well. And we were buoyant. And when one industry was suffering, we did have some automotive in that advanced manufacturing as well. The other sectors picked it up. It picked up our economy. So we were always very buoyant and doing very well. And that was very strategic that we had 4 strong pillars that we were looking. And I was out regularly on trade missions, bringing investment back into our city, and did that well and understand how to do that.
I want to talk about that because I think a lot of people who voted for you as leader voted for you for that perspective of being very business and economy focused. You call yourself fiscally responsible, which I prefer to fiscally conservative because I think that is a different
Correct.
thing. But the big complaint I have, and people know this about me, and I don't think it's specific to your campaign necessarily, but the big complaint I have is that we didn't really have an economic narrative for the campaign. You mentioned the small business tax cut. You mentioned there's also the tax cut for individuals as well. But beyond that, it wasn't much of a focus. You talked earlier about how the focus was sort of baked in, and it was on healthcare. And I was sending emails to people saying, "Can you please talk about the economy and all of that?" And
it's
I
about
think
the economy.
yeah,
Right.
it's about the economy, stupid thing. And Doug Ford's economic record, which I don't think people know, is atrocious. Like just on every level, I tweeted about it during the campaign, which, is about as effective as nothing. But he has a terrible record. And I think there was an opportunity to talk about it and really position ourselves as actually better on the economy. One of the big things I'm concerned about, you mentioned young people, is that unemployment for young people under 24 right now is atrocious. And I don't know that it's something
Highest
that's
in the
going to
country.
rebound.
Highest in the
Right?
country.
I think it's something that may not rebound as we talk about AI, as we talk about the tariffs, as we talk about just like climate change and what that's doing to the environment and people's personal finances. Like there is a cliff that is appearing before us, and Doug Ford is doing nothing on that front. He's talked about manufacturing and how Wynne lost 300,000 jobs. Well,
We're
he's lost
losing
just as many, right?
manufacturing
Like
jobs. We're
he's
losing
done nothing.
construction jobs.
Exactly. So he's done nothing on the economy at all, other than enrich his donors in various ways. And you talked during the campaign about how that's fundamentally what you would do differently. You wouldn't have the grift. But I think there was a missing narrative there. And I think it was true of the federal Liberals until Carney. And I think people are very hungry for some economic certainty and security in their lives, and for political leaders to actually talk about those things and make them feel better about the future. Can you talk about, if you got a second chance, what would a modern, progressive Ontario Liberal economy look like for the province?
That is an excellent question. I really thank you for that. And some of my financial bona fides were never really highlighted during the campaign because we didn't talk about the economy. But, you know, I've had a 20-year career in business and served as an executive in many positions. I had my own company for a while. I did some consulting. I have an MBA and a director's degree. I've sat on many public and private boards. That's my training. Also, my training as mayor. I've run a government, and I think that puts me in a different league from other leaders. Other than, I mean, Doug Ford runs a provincial government today. I ran City of Mississauga for 10 years and very successfully. But my training as a mayor is because you well know municipalities aren't allowed to run a deficit. So I think that's where the discipline comes in, the fiscal responsibility that you talk about, but yet the compassion. The money we raise is the money we spend, and that's it. You know, we can't run deficits. And that's been my training, and that's my orientation. And that's why I know that growth is so important, and that we need to attract business back, and we need to attract investment back, not just in the EV battery sector or focusing on OEMs. And the auto industry is critically important, but so are others. There are many others that are as well. I know they're talking about exploitation of the ring of fire, and they're doing it in a very irresponsible way without having consulted our Indigenous partners who have to be partners at the table. This is their land and they share in the profit, and let me be very declarative about that. But we need a more business orientation as a party. And so, you know, yes, you don't like when I say I'm a centrist, but for me, that's where Ontario is. You know, that's where Ontario is. We're business friendly. We want economic growth. I'm going to drive economic growth. But the reason I'm going to do that is to provide all those programs and services that we want, right?
I do want to talk about that because something I'm concerned about from a generational lens is whenever we talk about generational debt, we talk about the financial side of it, but we don't talk about the service debt that we hand over to people when we let things get really, really austere in government. And you're just talking about, you know, the reality when you're mayor is like you're sort of shit out of luck if you want to actually dip into debt to actually spend and provide services. You will have that ability if you become premier. And, you know, my opinion is that you would not do it in the Doug Ford way, which is you go into debt to line people's pockets. You'd actually do it to support services. So, you know, like if the economic horizon doesn't improve, are you willing to make those investments in people in future generations?
I had this conversation with the Ontario Young Liberals, their executive the other night. You know, they have one common concern, and that is housing. But let's get there first. Let's talk about education and how our colleges and universities aren't being properly funded, how there are too many teachers, not too many students, not enough teachers in a classroom, and how schools are crumbling, for goodness sakes, and how we don't support our colleges and universities operating funding to the degree that other provinces do. At a minimum, they get 30% funding,
Right.
where everywhere else it's 60%. You know,
That's
and
right.
they've been relying
Ontario is actually at the bottom
at
of
the
per student
bottom,
funding
and they
in the
have,
country. And it begs the question of how do you invest in the future workforce if you're not investing in their education, right?
and there you see universities and colleges closing campuses, closing departments, shutting down programs that don't have a high take up. This is a government that is starving education, and it is wrong. They've got to focus only on skilled workers. And listen, I know skilled trades is very, very important as well, but we need to build up our young people for the jobs of tomorrow, because AI is going to change a lot of that, on which jobs are relevant and which ones are not. And I believe in critical thinking and higher education, and I want our kids to have a really great education in some of those fantastic institutions that we have across the province today. Many of them are running deficits. Many of them had learned to rely on foreign students, and now that's being cut back, and they're struggling. And so we're seeing programs being cut, senior tenured professors being let go. It's criminal what is happening in our education system, and that has to be addressed.
You know, we could talk about this forever because I used to work in that ministry, of course, but I'm going to move on to a different topic, just, you know, conscious of our time. But one of the big pieces of electoral math is suburban Ontario, specifically the 905. As somebody who grew up in Newmarket, this is something I've always been focused on. I don't think you can become premier of this province without, winning a significant portion of the ridings outside of Toronto. Toronto, of course, is important math to that as well. But you mentioned earlier about the $8 million that they spent, that the PC spent advertising against you, primarily locally in Mississauga. I've heard that from other folks. I think that's unfortunate, of course, but to be expected to happen again. So given that reality, given that we only picked up one seat in the sort of 905 GTA belt of Ajax, given that you were not able to pick up your own seat, even though you did not run against an incumbent, actually. What's your plan to rebuild the Liberal strength in the suburbs, given that it is essentially the vehicle to government?
Yeah, it's a great question. And let me say that, this gives me a lot of humility, because I came in, we're going to win the 905, and I was for mayor and chair of the caucus of big city mayors, and they're going to come rally with us. And then it didn't happen. Let me share that in Mississauga, at least, Mississauga was specifically targeted, and we needed a distinct Mississauga strategy that we didn't get. We really did need one. We all won our advance polls handedly. In Mississauga, we won the advance polls. So what happened, Teresa, happened towards the end, I'll say the last 10 days, where resources were flooded in, and the premier was in every riding, like every single day, spent his time in Mississauga and nowhere else. And the number of resources, and then we faced the big blue machine, and some of that big blue machine bled from Brampton, as staffers were being released to work for the mayor's mother-in-law. So we were outgunned by that big blue machine. It's a mistake we won't ever make again. And we'll have a specific strategy that highlights the successes of my tenure as mayor in Mississauga, which we didn't pivot again. We didn't pivot to trade and tariffs, and we didn't pivot to the Mississauga only strategy. We stuck to our main messaging on healthcare and affordability. So that was another big miss. Now, there were some gains. We made a lot of gains with respect to popular support growing. We did pick up Ajax unexpectedly with Rob Sturjanik, who's a fantastic MPP, and also with Jonathan Sow in Don Valley North. That's a little more suburban than urban. Also another terrific person, and within Toronto, picking up Stephanie Smythe and Lee Fairclough, who was fantastic in Ottawa, with Tyler Watt, who's pretty incredible. But these are the people that are going, now that we have footholds, are going to help us grow. And as I mentioned, they're all going to mentor other ridings around them, and other ridings that speak to their critic portfolios across the province. They're going to, I don't want to mentor, oversee, assist. They're going to be their go-to person to assist in the rebuild, and be that presence to help build up capacity, because that really is the point. If we don't rebuild and revitalize at the local level, and we can leverage off our federal counterparts, we won't win again. We have the luxury of time right now, and we have the drive and the strategy, and I have the compassion. I have the focus to do so. That's all we're going to be doing, is rebuilding. Earlier nominations.
Bring up early nominations, actually, because one of the complaints I've heard from the Mississauga area is, I understood the strategy of waiting to select your seat, so that they couldn't organize as early against you, but it did put everyone around you at a disadvantage who didn't get nominated as early as perhaps they would have liked to.
Held back Mississauga, North Malton, and Centre, and Cooksville as options for me, and we were polling to determine. I had reservations about Cooksville for a whole bunch of reasons I won't get into with you online, because I know the communities, I know them very well, and I had run in Mississauga, North Malton as a councillor. and center had always been a strong riding for us in any case. So, we had polling that suggested it was strong. In the end, it proved not to be. So there were inaccuracies in the data, even from that respect. I do want to address getting a seat in the legislature. I think it's vitally important for me to be there. In fact, it's a huge miss. The fact that we have Liberal Caucus Services Bureau now is wonderful. It allows us to have all these resources around us. So every morning we have a strategy meeting going into question period. It allows us to discuss the theme and the questions and who's going to ask them. And then we get that all settled. They either write them themselves or we help them, or the team helps them be written. Mostly they do them themselves, and we practice them, whatever, you know how that works. And then John delivers my questions and it's heartbreaking, but I'm there to scrum. When the doors open, it's an effort. I've decided that when the House is sitting, I will be present in the House. I'll be present to scrum. People can see me on the nightly news, and people have noticed that they're seeing me more often when the legislature's sitting. And when the legislature's not sitting, I can use that time to travel across the province. The first year I used the time to travel, I thought it was more important to get me out meeting people in the smaller towns, but not so right now. I think it was a miss then too. I think I need to be in the ledge when we're sitting. Now there is a natural attrition rate of about 2 a year, but it has to be the right seat. Let's be honest, if Ernie Hardeman decided to retire, probably Woodstock wouldn't be a good one for me. It has to be the right seat as well, but I do plan to come in. And we also know, Teresa, that a number of MPPs announced ahead of the election that they weren't going to run again. And suddenly their names were on the ballot because it was snap call, and even the Conservatives didn't want to take a risk with an unknown person. We were on track to nominate all our people for June next year, June 26th. So we were scrambling at the very end. I think on the last couple of days, we had about a dozen, 12, 13, 14 to put in place. And not bad effort. We found some very good local candidates, many elected officials. But my goal personally will be that when the right seat opens up that is viable, I will run, because I do want a seat in the legislature.
It was similar when it was Stephen Del Duca as the leader. You are people who have been very specific to your local communities. Like, you have represented them for a long time. And I think it's, I think it's a little ridiculous when people say, oh, you should go run in Windsor. It's like, you have no attachment there, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So I agree. I agreed with that, at the time. And you may be right that when the cameras are focused on the legislature, that is the right place to be. So I'm glad you're doing the scrums, because I think that makes sense. There is an element of, regardless of how much media coverage you get, people just don't see it because of algorithms and things like that, which I think we have to
right. And I think our focus in the future will be on more of the digital ads. We'll be putting more money into that, as people aren't receiving the news in the traditional ways, in the way they used to.
I do want to talk about that because, and again, this wasn't something I was thinking about before we started talking to ask you, but I personally think the next campaign, especially if it happens later, we'll see when it happens, but I think the next campaign is going to be sort of the first digital campaign. And by that, I mean, not so much driven by earned media opportunities through a news release, but through the ads you're seeing online, the viral content you're seeing online.
Yeah.
Given that's the case, what are your thoughts around, modernizing the party from a digital standpoint? Because I think every government that comes in usually comes in on two things: a wave of new energy from new volunteers, usually younger people, and then also a wave of new technology that they've actually sunk some money into to get ahead of the game. And we see, the technology side, governments usually decay on that front because they get really used to government and don't innovate. But those are the two pieces that really drive parties into office, in my experience from watching as a political person. So what are your thoughts on the digital side and revamping the party on that side? Because it doesn't come without an expense, but it is an important investment, of course.
Well, interestingly, you should mention it. I'm trying to shake the wallet looser from Simon, whose focus is on repaying the debt right now.
Good luck with that.
No, Simon, we need to be running digital ads now. And so, our focus will be, it's changed. Right? It's changed. People don't receive their news or their advertising in the same way. It's all based on, as you mentioned, the algorithms. And we need to make a much heavier investment starting right away in digital in digital tools, and that has to start not for the next election campaign, but right away.
So I want to talk about, why we're really talking today, and it's about the leadership review. Um, as I said, the AGM is going to be in September. I've said before to people, I've explained the process. So essentially, you walk in as a delegate, you register for the conference, and you get your ballot right then to go vote. The vote doesn't say, do you want to keep Bonnie Crombie or not? It doesn't say anything like that. It says, do you want to have a leadership review, yes or no? And that's the simple question. So if the vote comes down to 50% of delegates plus one person say, yes, I would like a leadership review, that will happen. Which also to people, like, if say that does happen, I'm not expecting that to happen, but say that does happen, you could also run in that race as well. So people don't think about that as an option, but that's what it will look like for a delegate walking up to this. There's a lot of discussion about what a reasonable percentage is. We know that it is a simple majority will take it to a review or not. But there is a thought out there that, you really want the leader to have the backing of around 66% of voters. That is a made up number. It's based on past leadership races with other leaders in other decades and things like that. So it's not actually a hard and fast thing. But I think the question really is, what do you think is the number that you want to receive support from to really feel like, okay, we're in this together. Let's move forward to the
Teresa
next campaign.
Lubowitz, look at you.
And it may not be a specific number. It may just be anything, right?
So,
But I think this
yeah,
is a question that's on people's minds.
let's
So I
talk
wonder if you have
about it.
thoughts. Yeah,
Let's talk about the leadership review. And you're quite right that when people sign up, they come in and they register and they get their ballot. And the ballot will be phrased such that I'm hoping for the no response, no leadership review. Because
right.
for me, I need to prove each and every day to everyone that I believe in accountability to them and that I respect the process and the process that's underway. The review process that we conducted throughout the summer, the regional meetings that we had, the ongoing meetings that we will have with the executive committee and all the commissions and etc. The review isn't about a number. It's about trust. It's about momentum. And it's about the direction we want to lead and that they buy into the vision, which, as I mentioned, I want to be that leader that provides growth, economic growth, much like Mark Carney, to be able to fund the programs we all want. And it's about who you trust to lead us. And I would argue that I come with experience of having worked in the business community for over 20 years, having served federally, having run a government quite competently, having a very high percentage of vote for almost a decade. So it's who you trust to lead us in the future. And I've spent the past few months since the election with this listening exercise in mind to help us with the rebuilding and taking responsibility, because that's on me. What went wrong is ultimately my responsibility, and I am the only person is to be held accountable for that. But they should also know that I want change as much as they do. I saw the flaws. It all happened very quickly. We weren't completely prepared. We didn't have the resources. We thought we had another year and a half to get it right and to put forward the kind of campaign we would have wanted to run. I've been meeting with people across the province, not only former candidates, our candidates, riding presidents, our volunteers, just random people that people set up meetings with. Hey, have you ever met, Pastor so-and-so? You should sit down and have a coffee with him. I'm not backing away from any of it, and particularly none of the constructive criticism that has come my way. So I hope what people are seeing is a leader who isn't afraid of doing the hard work and isn't afraid of criticism. This is what I believe in. I gave up my fantastic job as mayor of the city of Mississauga. I resigned from it to do this because I believe in it so passionately. I want to take down Doug Ford, and I want your help. And I still believe that I'm the right person to do that, but that will be up to our membership. So I ran to rebuild the party and reconnect it with Ontarians. I want to win, and I know that they want to win. And I think they picked me because they saw that I could be that winner. I'm going to be the next Premier of Ontario, And I want everyone's support in this leadership review so that we can make it happen and that we can make the reforms that we've been promising happen. Because if we go to a leadership race, it's going to delay everything. This policy convention you and I just spoke about, really tough to have a policy convention when you have a leadership race on, right? And the kinds of reforms and rebuilding PLAs, all of it will be put aside. The fundraising for the party will get put aside as money goes into the leadership campaigns instead. So a lot at risk, So the party is going to have this decision to give me this mandate or not. My goal is to keep moving forward with the focus that I have, with the humility that I have and what I've learned from this past race, and to create a plan and a strategy to defeat Doug Ford. And because that is ultimately the goal, but as well as a plan to get there, which involves revitalizing and reforming our party.
I really appreciate you coming on and doing this in long form, because I think it is a service to the membership to have these
I
conversations
really
out in the
do.
open
And
and full.
if you don't mind, I kind of have a couple of, closing thoughts.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
This party means everything to me. I joined when I was 16 years old and I started knocking on doors and organizing events. And I believed in what the party stood for then. They shared my values and my principles. And I've never strayed from our party. I would never vote for a different party. I've worked my way up over the years, whether it's been in business or through the party ranks. Of course, I held some positions in some of the executive positions as well. And I've seen firsthand what we're capable of when we're a united and a focused party and proud of our values and proud of who we are, proud to be liberal again. I've heard the criticisms. I've listened to the feedback. And for the first time in a long time, we finally have the resources, the capacity, and the people we need and the opportunity to rebuild in the right way to do it. So for me, I want to make this point. This was never about personal gain. It's about public service. It's about taking down Doug Ford and building up the Ontario Liberal Party. I show up to the legislature each and every day so that we can continue to fight for the people of this province. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to rebuild this party. The same party I believed in when I was a young Liberal. It's the same party today. Strong, compassionate, and focused on providing people with a better life. We are united and focused. The common enemy is not each other. It's Doug Ford. And we need to remind ourselves of that every day. And then the gains that we have made will now allow us to defeat Doug Ford. That's what we need to do. That's what I'm fighting against. And that's where I'm putting my energy so that we can win again.
Perfect note to end on. Thanks, Bonnie.
Thank you, Teresa.
You've been listening to Progress Canada, presented by Lightbulb Narrative, a Canadian communications company specializing in content creation, narrative development, and strategic communications. Our music was composed by Elliot Middleton. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing to access future episodes the moment they drop. Thanks for listening.